Wow, I didn't know such a beautiful lady existed, Steve said, looking at his fiance's sister, Sarah. Sarah smiled happily and said, "Well, I never thought my plain sister would marry such a handsome guy." They exchanged glances with each other. I had a bad feeling from that moment. My name is Christina. I will be 28 years old. I met my fiancé, Steve, who is also 28, at a training seminar held outside of our company. We started dating after having a meal together. As he sat next to me and had forgotten his writing utensils, which I lent to him. We decided to get married after 6 months of dating due to his enthusiastic approach. Since he was handsome, people around us started to speculate if I was just after his looks. But I was somehow attracted to his nonchalant attitude. Looking back, it might have been a kind of maternal instinct. The first time he took me home, he was excited like a child, saying, "You live in a house like this? That's nice." He had always lived in an apartment, so he seemed to admire living in a house. "It's a bit big for one person to live in. It's filled with my parents' memories. My parents passed away in an accident 5 years ago. The house became their legacy." "Wait, you live here alone?" he said, surprised and sympathetic towards me. "When we decided to get married," he said, "I want to live in that house with you. Let's create our memories together." I readily agreed. The house came with a parking space, so he moved in with his prized car. I don't really understand, but it seemed to be a very valuable car. He knows a lot about designer stuff and often identifies my designer's items, saying, "That's Bulgari, right?" Actually, I'm not very knowledgeable about such things. And was just borrowing something that belonged to my mother. My parents were wealthy, so there were many such items. But I only bought what I could afford with my salary. This might have been influenced by my flamboyant sister. Like Steve, she would buy designer's items, get bored of them, and then sell them to pawn shops. She always complained about being out of money. Despite claiming to be broke, she would spend a month's salary on a single bag, which I found mysterious. I realized that Steve had the same tendencies as my sister after marrying him. Right after our marriage, we discussed living expenses. And he was surprised at my salary, saying, "Is this all you make?" My company, although a major one, was known for its low salaries for those in their 20s. Steve thought I earned a lot based on my company's name and the brands I owned. "When you're a female employee, that's how it is," I said, and he murmured quietly, "This is not what I expected." In the midst of this uneasy atmosphere, he suddenly said, "I'm quitting my job." His company was a small to medium-sized firm, famous for its steady work but known for low salaries. Perhaps the job didn't suit his taste for extravagance. Most people at his workplace said he was good with words but didn't think highly of him. He justified his resignation by saying, "They don't understand my talent. I'll rot if I stay in a company like that." That's when I started to see his true nature. On his days off, he either went for drives in his fancy car or lounged on the sofa with his smartphone. When I asked what he was doing on his phone, he'd snap, "I'm job hunting, obviously." But when I caught a glimpse of his screen, he was either watching funny videos or playing games. Even when I returned from work on weekdays, he was still lounging and would rush me, saying, "You're home late," or "I'm hungry." When I asked him to put the laundry in, he'd reluctantly say, "I'm busy looking for a job." Isn't that something a woman should do? I eventually gave up asking as he would just sulk. Even after a month, there was no sign of Steve getting a job. And he had become what you might call a freeloader. Whenever we went shopping or out to eat, he never showed any intention of paying. And I ended up covering all the expenses. Then, one day, he said, "I'm going out to buy something. Can you lend me $100? I felt this was not right and asked, "What are you going to buy?" When he replied, "Does it matter?" I refused to give him the money. And he muttered under his breath, "Useless." Around the time I was exhausted from taking care of him, my sister Sarah started coming to our house. Actually, I had been trying to keep Sarah out of the house for certain reasons. But I couldn't stop her since Steve let her in without asking. Recently, after breaking up with her boyfriend, Sarah seemed to have a lot of free time and would come over on her days off to chat with Steve. They bonded over designers I didn't recognize and loudly said things like, "Oh, Christina has always been stingy," so I could hear them. Sometimes, Steve would take Sarah out for a drive, saying, "I'm going for a drive with Sarah." I once saw Sarah giving money to Steve and confronted her about it. She retorted, "You should give him some money too." Poor Steve, he doesn't have a job. But he's not working. I said. That's why he can't find a good job. You really don't know how to support a man, she replied. She even accused me of not cooking sometimes. Isn't that a bit cold for a wife? I explained, it's only when I'm busy with overtime at work. And I tell him to eat something on his own. It's not like I deliberately don't cook. But Sarah said, even more reason to give him money for food. He said he was in trouble because there was nothing at home. She started to interfere in our relationship. Then, a friend invited me to visit their new shop in Hawaii. I have always loved Hawaii and used to go there once a year when I was single. So, when I told Steve I wanted to go, he asked, "What about my meals?" Thinking this was a good chance for him to appreciate me, I said, "Please manage on your own," and left the sulking Steve behind. My friend's shop in Hawaii was wonderful, and I spent a great week there, forgetting all the unpleasant things back in New York. When I returned to New York, refreshed, I found Sarah and Steve relaxing in my living room. The house was a mess, and the kitchen was full of unwashed dishes. "What are you doing here, Sarah?" I asked. She turned around and said, "Oh, well, you left Steve alone to go play in Hawaii, didn't you?" Steve was indignant. "This is the first time I've been treated so badly." "It's all your fault." Sarah laughed and added, "That's right. This house was originally our family home. I've moved my stuff in too." "What?" I was shocked. Steve, sitting smugly, said, "If it was originally the family home, then it belongs to you and your sister. You've been monopolizing it, right?" I started to respond, but Sarah interrupted, "That's right. I threw away your stuff. Go check upstairs." "Did you throw away my belongings?" I asked, rushing upstairs. Indeed. I found all my clothes and household items gone, replaced by what appeared to be Sarah's things. As I stood there stunned, Sarah and Steve came up, gloating. "Serves you right for belittling me," Steve said. Sarah laughed, "You got what you deserved. Leaving your husband to go to Hawaii." Steve continued, "And you don't even earn much. Who needs a low-income wife? Sarah earns $7,000 a month." He put his arm around her. Sarah leaned into him, "I think I can take good care of Steve." They began to flirt, leaving me feeling awkward and realizing it was pointless to talk to them. I looked at my emptied room, feeling sad. But then I noticed my karate uniform forgotten on the wall. It seemed to be telling me, "Fight." I grabbed the uniform, glared at the two of them, and said, "I'm leaving." They seemed surprised, expecting some resistance from me. But Steve clapped his hands, "Good, you're being sensible." Sarah smirked victoriously, "Well, you had no chance of winning anyway." I left with my travel bag and karate uniform. Before going to Hawaii, I had made sure to keep the house's title deed, registry, and bank cards safe from Steve by depositing them in a bank safety deposit box. So, the next day, I promptly visited the real estate agent and requested to sell the house. Then, I went to the municipal office to get a divorce form. And returned to the house with the real estate agent who wanted to inspect it. Upon seeing me, Sarah and Steve were surprised and asked aggressively, "What do you want?" I presented the divorce form. Steve carelessly took it, saying, "Is that all?" After receiving the divorce form, I securely placed it in my bag and declared, "Well, I'm selling this house." Steve and Sarah looked at me in shock. Sarah confronted me, "What are you saying, Christina? This is the house of our parents' memories. I can't believe you're selling it." I coldly replied, "I thought so too, but now I have no choice but to sell it. The property tax is no joke." Steve yelled, "What are you talking about? $7,000 is enough to easily cover it." I told him, "You seem to be misunderstanding something. Sarah's $7,000 is actually debt." Steve blinked in disbelief. "What? She loves luxury, doesn't work, and spends over $5,000 a month. So, she ends up borrowing about $7,000 somewhere every month. I bet the total debt is about $100,000 by now." $100,000. Steve looked at Sarah in disbelief. "Wait, what about the $7,000 in cash I saw?" Sarah shrank under his glare. "That must be borrowed money. She got used to splurging after getting a lump sum of our parents' wealth. If you don't work, wealth disappears quickly." Sarah, hit by the truth, got furious and yelled, "Shut up. Don't you dare lecture me, you little sister." When I grabbed her hand and twisted it behind her, Sarah cried out in pain, "Ow, ow, it hurts." There, it happened again. "Every time I try to talk to you, you react like this." "Because you don't listen," I said, releasing her twisted hand. Sarah collapsed on the floor, seemingly drained. Steve, realizing something, questioned, "Wait, the house. How can you sell it without Sarah's consent if it's jointly owned?" "Oh, that's a lie." "What?" "There was an inheritance. But Sarah said she didn't want the house and just wanted cash. She took everything that could be converted to cash. So, I only got this house. The story about the house being jointly owned is a lie Sarah made up." Under his glare, Sarah finally broke down crying. But, I'm drowning in debt, suffering. And it was so frustrating seeing you living happily in our family home. When the house is worth $200,000 and our parents had almost $500,000 in cash. Who squandered it all?" I asked. "Back then, you had lots of men around you. You felt good throwing money around, didn't you?" As I spoke, Sarah started sobbing heavily, with snot and tears. Steve looked at her with disgust. I originally wanted to cut ties with such a pretentious sister. Which is why I agreed to her taking the larger share. I asked you not to come to the house, remember? That was your severance payment. When Sarah slumped down, Steve angrily pulled her hair and yelled, "Hey, how dare you deceive me like this? You're just a debt-ridden old woman." As he swung her around in anger, she cried out, "Ouch. Let go. You're just a parasite living off women because of your good looks." Steve raised his hand to hit her, but I quickly intervened and threw him with a karate technique. Sarah trembled, thinking she was going to be hit. Steve held his arm in pain, stunned by being thrown. "Don't you dare lay a hand on a woman." I faced Steve and said, "You need to pack your things and leave within a week." Then, I put my arm around Sarah and urged her, "Come on, Sarah, let's go." I thought it was not good to leave them alone. Steve glared at us resentfully but didn't follow. Alone with Sarah, she sobbed and pleaded, "I'm sorry, I'm so sorry. I didn't know he was like that." I smiled and said, "Yeah, an apology won't cut it. Let's consider our relationship over." I walked away, leaving her behind. Sarah clung to me, begging, "Wait. I'll change, let's live together, okay?" I grabbed her chin and said, looking into her eyes, "Who do you think you are to say that?" When she realized my anger, her eyes began to wander. That house was our parents' memory. Whose fault is it that we had to sell it? Who squandered the inheritance our parents left for their own pleasure? As I tightened my grip on her chin, she winced and shook her head. I yelled, "I can't trust you anymore," and let go of her face. Sarah collapsed, unable to stand. I said, "Goodbye," and left. Later, I heard rumors that Sarah got caught by loan sharks due to dealing with shady lenders and was forced into labor at some place. She was seen in her 40s, walking in the downtown area at night. Her once proud hair unkempt, wearing sweatpants. A far cry from her past self, surrounded by men and luxury designer stuff. I was glad I cut ties with her. Those who do not work shall not eat. After divorcing me, Steve apparently started working at a nightclub, using his womanizing skills. However, he didn't do the menial tasks expected of a newcomer, and was disliked for breaking rules and stealing senior clients, leading to him being fired with a large debt. In the end, no matter where he goes, he does the same things. I learned about this from the lawyer who talked to him to get my compensation after the divorce. At that time, Steve was emaciated, living in a shabby apartment without a bath or any deposit. The handsome guy I heard about, the lawyer wondered, surprised by his change. I managed to recover about $20,000 by having his prized car towed before other debt collectors could seize it. Steve reportedly wailed like a child when his car was towed. I regret not seeing that. With the money from selling the house, I decided to move to Hawaii. My friend there was delighted and welcomed me as a business partner. Though I became divorced, this opportunity might never have come otherwise. The shop in Hawaii is thriving, providing me with a more affluent life than in New York. Some residents in Hawaii asked me to open a karate school. When I did, many adults and children came to learn. I've developed a good relationship with a man I met there and am expecting a proposal soon. I'm truly glad I made the leap to leave New York.